Welcome and happy Veterans Day. My name is Brent Holmes, and I have the privilege of serving as the Associate Director of the Hounstein Center for Presidential Studies. Thank you for joining us for this evening's program. At this time, I'm going to ask everybody to please rise, and gentlemen, remove your covers. Veterans may remain covered and render the hand salute as the national anthem is played. Thank you. Veterans Day is a special day, first established as Armistice Day in 1919 to honor the end of World War I. November 11th was not recognized as Veterans Day until 1954. The historical significance of the date, the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, provides an extraordinary backdrop to honor and celebrate all American veterans. If you have worn the uniform of the United States military, please stand. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your service. I would also like to thank our partners for tonight's event. It wouldn't be possible without them. The Gerald R. Ford Presidential Library and Museum, the Armed Forces Thanksgiving, Grand Valley's Office of the President, and the Peter Secchia Military and Veterans Resource Center. I now have the privilege to introduce one of our Peter C. Cook Leadership Academy fellow candidates to provide tonight's Leadership Minute and introduce tonight's featured speaker. Matt Enger is a senior here at Grand Valley State University and is studying secondary education in social studies and deaf studies. In addition to studying at Grand Valley, he continues to serve in the Michigan Army National Guard, the Michigan Air National Guard, after serving 3 years in the United States Air Force. As a first-year Peter C. Cook Leadership Academy Fellow, Matt is excited for the opportunities to develop connections and be exposed to new perspectives. Outside of school activities, he is passionate about politics, travel, and basketball. After graduation, he is looking forward to teaching social studies and preparing the next generation of students. Please help me welcome Matt Enger to the podium.
Well, thanks for that introduction, Brett. As he said, my name is Matt Enger. I'm with the Peter C. Cook Leadership Academy. So a little context about myself. Before I enrolled here at Grand Valley State, I served active duty in the Air Force at the 1st Fighter Wing Langley Air Force Base, providing support for the F-22 mission. And when you join the military, and basic training, you quickly learn that there's a chain of command. Something about getting yelled at for 8 weeks really drills that into your head. But as a junior enlisted, you don't always necessarily expect to fill a leadership role. You're not necessarily looking for leadership opportunities. But sometimes leadership, both physically and metaphorically, will still find you. Towards the end of my time at Langley, I had transitioned from doing the mission to teaching others how to do the mission. But when our major who was running our training program received a new assignment, there was a void that was created, and the needs of me from my unit had changed. Due to my experience and my knowledge of the mission, I was asked to fill that void until a new replacement could arrive. So in addition to my instructor responsibilities, I was asked to be in charge of a small instructor cadre of senior airmen and staff sergeants. I was asked to be help make sure we were in compliance with our training records and standards with Department of Air Force and Air Combat Command standards. And I was asked to help develop a new curriculum that our unit would use going forward. I would be lying to you if I said those weren't a little intimidating at the time, even a little overwhelming. But that moment, that opportunity, taught me a valuable lesson. When these moments appear, you have two choices. You can accept the challenge, push past your comfort zone a little bit, and learn from the results, the successes, and the failures. Or you can shy away from the moment, and you can lose an opportunity for growth and become stagnant. Fortunately, I accepted this opportunity, and through a little bit of self-reflection, I learned that I tend to try to shoulder things by myself. I tended to internalize my failures probably a little too hard. I didn't rely on my wingmen as much as I should. But this also created an obsession. It created an obsession for me to learn how I can continue to grow and how I can help others grow. And I think that's one of the true essence of leadership. A legendary coach by the name of Pat Riley once said, to have long-term success as a coach or in any position of leadership, you have to be obsessed in some way. So as leaders, we must be obsessed with growing from challenges and opportunities, even if they push us past our comfort zone, especially when they push us past our comfort zone. And we have to be obsessed with continual growth in part from self-reflection. Otherwise, how can we expect others to do the same and follow our lead? My name is Matt Anger. I am a leader. So now on to the main event. It's with my great privilege to be able to introduce Lieutenant Colonel Lisa Jaster. Lieutenant Colonel Jaster graduated from the United States Military Academy at West Point with a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering and was commissioned as an active duty engineering officer. In 2002, Colonel Jaster deployed in support of Operation Enduring Freedom, and then again in 2003 for Operation Iraqi Freedom. While on active duty, she completed her master's in civil engineering at Missouri University of Science and Technology in 2004. After being stationed for 2 years in South Korea, she left active Army to work for the Royal Dutch Shell for 12 years before rejoining the Army as a reservist in 2012. And from April to October 2015, she took a 6-month leave of absence and attended Army Ranger School, being one of the 3 females that graduated from the first ever integrated Ranger School course. And after another deployment to Iraq in 2018, she left Royal Dutch Shell in 2019 to become the Director of Civil Engineering at M&S Engineering in Spring Branch, Texas. In August of 2022, she chose to leave corporate America to follow her purpose, where she now works as an executive coach, leadership development expert, and keynote speaker. She continues to serve in the U.S. Army Reserve with over 18 years of military service. She prides herself in working with clients to improve their effectiveness, both in and outside the office environment. Please join me in welcoming Colonel Jaster.
Well, first let me start by saying Happy Veterans Day. Second, do we have any devil dogs in the room? Raise your hand. I know it's a special time for you. Happy birthday, y'all. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the Marine Corps, they celebrate their birthday, the Marine Corps' birthday, as if it was their 21st birthday every single year. So bless them and their spirited behaviors, but as you can see by the photograph, the really large and in charge one in the middle, the love of my life happens to be a Marine, and he thinks all of November is the Marine Corps' birthday ball. So every year our Christmas card actually comes from the birthday ball. So how many non-service members do we have in the room, just so I know? Okay, so look around and see the people who have their hands down. Those are the people, when they laugh, you laugh, okay? You got it? Okay, and for you, I want to set up a couple rules to military storytelling. So the first rule of military storytelling is anybody a fisherman or fisherwoman or fisher person? Who fishes? Who fishes? Okay, so you guys know, it's like the military. Every story only needs to be 10% truth. Yeah? Okay, good. So we have that established. So that's my caveat. So when we leave here today, you can't call me a liar. You just say I told a military story. Got it. Okay. The second thing is, if you hear me refer to anyone, they either have a nickname, a title, something weird, because everyone in the military, if you have any sort of affection towards them, either extremely positive or extremely negative, you do not refer to them by their actual name. Valid? And the third rule, now this is the most important military storytelling rule. Every good story starts with, so no shit, there I was. So a lot of times people ask me, being one of the first 3 women to graduate from Army Ranger School, if I ever thought about quitting. And I would love to say that quit never ever entered my mind. But I'm going to be vulnerable now just for a moment and let you know the one time when it came pretty damn close to knocking down the door. So here we are in mountains phase. And I'll get into Ranger School and the description of it in a couple minutes. But mountain phase is phase 2 of Ranger School. It is the hardest phase physically. As you can imagine, it's all the hiking, but now add the mountains, right? Not only are you adding the mountains, but you're adding all the ropes and equipment you need to climb up and down those glorious mountains. And of course, it doesn't matter what time of year it is, along the Appalachian Trail in Dahlonega, Georgia. Somehow at night, it is cold. Like, my body hurts cold. So this happens to be August 10th, 2015. I remember this only because it was my son's birthday. I am not that good at dates. It was just my son's birthday. And I had thought that by August 10th, 2015, I would have graduated Ranger School, been home, and my hair would start growing out. You don't see any pictures here, but I did have to shave my head down to 1/4 inch of hair. It was not a good look for me. I'll be honest. I am not pretty with a buzz cut. And then I lost 20, 25 pounds, so that gaunt face plus the buzz cut, I wasn't scaring my husband that the guys at school were hitting on me. We'll just leave it at that, okay? So I might have been a token female at the school, but he was not worried once he saw how absolutely gorgeous I looked with my head shaved. So here we are in mountains, and the 2 other females had moved on. And I had actually recycled, so I had to restart the hardest phase. And that was really, really defeating. When I found that out, my heart broke. And my heart broke mostly because about 2 minutes before I was told I had to restart mountains phase, the guy who was grading me took me to the side and was like, damn, you're one hard woman. Like, whatever you're doing, don't ever stop. Keep driving on. Everything in that said, I gotta go, I'm moving on, life is good. And then I walked in for my review and they're like, yeah, you have an opportunity to do even better. And I had to restart. So my heart was broken. My 2 other female comrades were moving on. I definitely wasn't gonna be the first female to graduate from Ranger School because God willing, one of them would graduate before me. And so things in my life had changed. We're in mountains. When you're in mountains, you're in there for either 6 days or 4 days, and then you have like a 1-day break in between. And it's a total of a 10-day field problem. So we're out in the middle of nowhere, and it rolls up on my son's 7th birthday, and so no shit, there I was on the side of a mountain, barely able to stand straight up, and we had to take a knee because we had to do a security stop. So I found myself as a 37-year-old mother of 2 who does Army part-time. I'm a reservist, by the way. This isn't even my job. I'm just doing it for fun. I'm definitely not doing it for the pay. Definitely not doing it for the clothing. But yeah, so I'm out in the middle of the woods, and I take a knee, and I've got my rifle, and I'm looking out, and the guy who kneels next to me, because you're supposed to be in buddy pairs, happens to actually be older than me and a chaplain. So this is a chaplain who's going to Ranger School because he's deploying with the Ranger Battalion, and they want chaplain to have the same experiences as the troops he's going to minister to. I'm an odd duck. He is a duck out of water who's odd, the wrong color, and extremely uncomfortable. Like, this is not his world. So he and I are kind of back to back, looking out over the mountains, and it's a beautiful sunset. You know, the one thing about Ranger School is because nobody's around and you got to be quiet all the time, the scenery is absolutely gorgeous. But Chaplain and I are kind of foot to foot, hanging out with our weapons that don't have real rounds in them, so it's even more fun to carry them around all day. And I looked at him and I was like, you know, so I'm a Christian. Just hopefully that's cool with everybody in here. I'm thinking this is a safe space. But I looked back at Chaplain. I was like, Chaplain, pray with me. And he's like, okay. And at this point, I had gone from being Jaster to Ranger Jaster to Mama Jaster. And he's all right, Mama, I'll pray with you. So it's Mama and Chaplain are sitting there taking their knee. And he's like, do you want me to pray or are you going to pray? I'm like, oh, I got this one. And I started off, closed my eyes. Dear Lord, thank you so much for this opportunity, this beautiful sunset. Thank you for giving me the strength to continue on. But if I happen to roll down this cliff and break my ankle, not so bad that it's permanently damaged, but bad enough that I get to go home, I won't be mad at you. Amen. And Chaplain turns around and with the butt of his rifle hits me in the kidneys. He's like, come on, we got to keep going through this together. And I only tell that story to say, hey, we all hit those low points. We all hit those times when we just can't go anymore. The key is reach out. You might not have a chaplain that butt strokes you to the kidney. I hope you don't. But if you do, that's probably a really good friend. Keep them around. They also will tell you when your clothes look bad. Ladies, you know what I'm talking about. But I obviously graduated. So that was kind of the halfway point in my experience, and I just needed a little bit of a gut check, or in this case, maybe to be butted with a rifle. So before I go too far, I want you all to understand who I am. So I put this collage up because it's a very simple way of saying some part of your life is probably pretty similar to some part of my life. I'm an athlete. I'm an avid reader. I have no time to read anymore, so I audiobook and call it reading. So I'm a complete cheat, and I think there's a lot of people that can empathize with that. I'm in the car more than I'm in anywhere else, so those audibles really work for me. I'm a hunter, and I'm a mom. And even more important, after those kids leave the house and I'm starting to get to that point where it's coming pretty close, I'm a wife. And I call this little group right here, I call them Team Jaster. Like our text messages is named Team Jaster. So in reference to my chaplain friend, I'm also going to say, if you don't have a chaplain friend, go ahead and pick your team. My Team Jaster, I picked him. He's the big one in the middle. And the two kids, those are mine. They don't look like that anymore, I promise. And they hate that picture because neither of them had their braces yet. So we're going to keep it in the slideshow just for the sake of we got to keep my kids humble too. But I have my Team Jaster. I have the people that are my support. And so that's a little bit of who I am. And I want to say this is Ranger School. So now that you know who I am, I was a reservist when I went to Ranger School, which means I had 7 years of active duty time. I got off active duty after I married my husband. He stuck with me through my active duty company command. I actually had 2 company commands. And if you don't know anything about that, it's about usually 150 soldiers that you're responsible for, but you're only in your 20s. So you're parenting people who are older than you oftentimes. You're trying to help them go through hard times of their life. I happen to be a company commander overseas, which means I had that wonderful soldier who, decided to marry the girl that worked in the bar who didn't have a passport. He lost his security clearance, couldn't actually come back into the country with the rest of the unit at the end of the year. Those kind of people are yours, and you're responsible for them. And my husband stuck through it with me for me having 130 children. So he figured it was okay for us to have 2 children together since I could handle company command. But he is a Marine and I'm in the Army, so we decided we were going to get off active duty because we could never be co-located. He followed me around for a short period because I stayed in active duty, but he just wasn't really good leading the family readiness group. I was often the only female, which meant the family readiness group is all of the military spouses. So it was usually all the wives and my 6'9" college basketball husband. That really wasn't his niche. So eventually I got out. I did get a job at Royal Dutch Shell. I spent 5 years completely out of the military and got drugged kicking and screaming back in. I actually got recruited via my favorite, social media. Somebody reached out via Facebook and recruited me back into the military. And really fun unit where we didn't wear uniforms, we didn't do regular Army stuff, and we worked on programs that only get exercised if the stuff hits the fan. Like if America as a country has a really bad day, then that unit was important. Other than that, it was a lot of deep thought and a lot of meetings. We'll leave it at that. So when I went to Ranger School, I was not only part-time Army, but I was no longer in a unit where I shot. Every once in a while, I did PT. I did it more because my ego wants me to look good in a bikini. I didn't do it so much for the Army. And I had one uniform, and I wore that one uniform for ceremonies and the military hoopla. If I was going to get promoted, I needed a rank to pull off and put a new one on. And that's what I was doing in 2014. When the Ranger School opportunity came out, I had to look up some of the stats. And here are some of the stats. Ranger School is a 9-week course. I am an overachiever. I took 6 months to graduate that 9-week course. I wanted to be there so bad, I just couldn't possibly leave. And kind of to lead into that, I kind of cursed myself because when I first showed up at Ranger School, I made mention to the other females that were there, and I said, one of us is going to stay here a really long time. And they said, well, that's stupid. Why would you say that? I said, well, there's enough pretty hardcore women out there with CrossFit, MMA. Like, you're looking at some of these women, and they're tough as woodpecker lips. Like, nobody's doubting that these women can physically succeed. But we have to prove to America, and mostly to Congress, that women can also deal with all the other stuff. It's one thing to live in the woods. Like, we've got women camping. It's another thing to walk 200 miles in 9 weeks. By the way, that's the standard for Ranger School. If you go there and you're only there for one iteration, unlike me, you walk about 200 miles in those 9 weeks. We know there's women out there who can do stuff like that. There's a lot of people who are super amazing. But can they do that? Not eat, not sleep, and also lead combat tactics and have their battle buddies follow them? Even though we all know at this point in time, in 2014, there weren't a whole lot of infantrymen that were like, yeah, I'll follow some random lady. Sounds good. One with kids, one that does Army for fun. Yes, please put her in front of me as my squad leader. I'll do anything she says. So, you had that dynamic as well. So as I'm researching whether or not I want to go there, I find out, yes, in 9 weeks, you walk on average of 200 miles. The average work day during those 9 weeks, 19 and a half hours. For the love of God, who the hell works 19 and a half hours a day for 9 straight weeks? And that's the average. That's the average. And every time we got slung out of an airplane, we call it airborne operations in the military, but yeah, you just get slung out of an airplane. They had to give us 8 hours of rest time. Remember that 8 hours for all 4 of our jumps? That's calculated into that 19 and a half hour average work day. Average food, you get 2 meals ready to eat, 2 of those prepackaged, highly sodium, super healthy meals. Great. You get 2 of those per day. They give them to you, one right before you go to bed and one right after you wake up. Of course, you carry them with you, but you get them at those intervals. So basically in one sitting, since many times my sleep was less than an hour long, within an hour of each other, I would ingest about 2,400 calories. So you know, if I was sitting on my butt right now, as a 47-year-old female at 140 pounds, I'm actually 143 right now, but hey, we're working on it. But my average burn rate, just sitting still, is a little over 1,500 calories. So now add on walking over 200 miles in that 9-week period, and I'm probably burning a lot more calories than I'm consuming. Oh, did I forget to mention I'm wearing a pack and carrying a rifle? That pack average weight of the backpack, we call it a rucksack, 85 pounds. 85 pounds. The normal weapon, you know, you're anywhere between 10 and 12 pounds, but a lot of times if you're carrying one of the big guns, you've got a 27-pound weapon on you plus ammunition. So all in all, my 140-pound frame, which started Ranger School, I gained weight to go there, which was a lot of fun. I had to force feed myself chocolate milk and whole milk, the good stuff. Not that thin rubbish that they tell you you're supposed to drink, but I'm talking about the whole milk with chocolate sauce in it. I drank that every night right before bed because I wanted to thicken up. So I went to Ranger School at about 150 pounds, graduated somewhere in the 120, 125 area. Again, shaved head, gaunt face, super sexy. But going through all that, at some point in time, let's say I was at my normal 140, 135, and I'm carrying a ruck, let's say it's 80 pounds, 20 pounds of weapons and ammunition. I've got 100 pounds on me, and I'm only at the 130 range. So just telling you the physical challenges of Ranger School. To give you a little bit more about Ranger School, it's a 3-phase course. We'll just say crawl, walk, run. It gets harder as you go. But before you start that, you have something called RAP week. That's Ranger Assessment Phase. It's 4 days long, which is why in the Army we call it a week, just to mess people up. You know, we gotta kind of like serpentine. All right, we gotta misdirect, right? But yeah, that four days is all stuff we know about. It's all they're not complicated tasks if you're well rested, because then you can be well tested. But when you haven't eaten, when you haven't eaten much and you haven't slept much, navigating for 4 hours in the woods in the dark and finding 5 points, it's pretty complicated when you can't use a flashlight and your body's starting to break down. So we had land navigation, we had water obstacle courses, we had knife fighting classes, which if you do have an opportunity to read the book, I don't really appreciate them. I didn't really respect them. I didn't think that they were accurate, but it was a great way to add some extra cardio into our day. We did other obstacle courses, but we also had the culminating event, which was a 12-mile ruck. Talking about the concept of never quitting and driving through, the ruck march, that 20K ruck, or 12 point whatever miles it was probably one of my bigger challenges while I'm at Ranger School. I'm actually just flipping slides because I know some of you have ADD and can't look at me for a full 45 minutes. So there's nothing really important going on here, but I'm gonna show you stuff anyways. Magic. So on that 12-mile road march, it's the culminating event, and when you finish that, you've graduated from RAP week and started phase 1. So you fail anything during RAP week, you're going home. You shaved your head, you packed your stuff up in 2 duffel bags, you fail anything, boom, you're gone. And that's it, no questions asked, you're kicked out. But once you finish that ruck march, you're in it to win it. You have an opportunity to fail and succeed. To tell you a little bit about how hard Ranger School is, it does have about plus or minus a 50% attrition rate. If you looked earlier, my class, the year I went, it got close to 63% attrition, and that was, you can say that the standards changed for women. Feel free to say it if you want. Just understand that I had to pass additional tasks before I could even go to Ranger School than my male peers did. So feel the way you need to feel about it, but we definitely had a higher failure rate than ever before, to include the males. And it wasn't just the females failing. 19 women showed up on day 0. 8 of us made it through RAP week. 3 of us ultimately graduated. Since then, over 150 women have now graduated from Army Ranger School. They have an opportunity. When we went, we had less than 3 months notice that we were going. So there was no preparation. You were either ready to go or you weren't. So day 0, almost 400 people showed up for my Ranger School class. By breakfast on day 1, we were down to about 300. So we lost 25% of our people before breakfast on day 1. So if you kind of understand the process, it's so bad you're never allowed to during RAP week, you're not allowed to bring your bags into the barracks building. Everything you own stays outside, which of course it rains every day in Georgia, so I'm not sure exactly what the point of that is, other than we wore a lot of soppy underpants. But they knew that people were going to get kicked out or were going to fail so frequently, they didn't want them moving their stuff in because they figured they'd have to move it out right away anyways. And it was kind of interesting. You'd come back from every major event and everybody would just pick up your duffel bags and you'd just slide over and fill the holes. So fast forward at Ranger School. I told you this was a part-time job for me. My duffel bags I had been issued in 1996. My peers, the average age was 22, which means in 2015, I literally had duffel bags that were older than some of my classmates. And these were my peers. These were my contemporaries. It was a very interesting world to live in. And I bring that up because I love looking at this audience. We may or may not have some generations covered here. And to bring and to see people together under the same cause, under the same umbrella, celebrating Veterans Day together in a leadership forum that go everywhere from our early 20s to, I'm not going to make eye contact with any of you, but some of us that are no longer in our early 20s. It's fantastic to see this. And what I want to make sure is if you didn't before we all came in here, hopefully you do it after, please network with someone who's not in your demographic, because that is something that we as veterans, we know. We know how to do it. My peer, when he was 19 years old and fell asleep, okay, so here we are. No shit, there I was. All right? Florida phase, oh, beautiful. Swamps everywhere. Of course, raining. Everything's wet. Hanging out with these buddies of mine. This kid's name's Bluer, and the women had to keep a 1/4 inch of hair, but the men shaved their head. Well, Bluer's hair started growing in because we had been in the field for a solid 6 days. It was a 10-day field problem with no return to the world of showers. We were on day 6, and you're doing everything at this point in time to stay awake. I fell asleep in the swamp and actually leaned up against my pack that had a little air in it, and luckily I was light enough that I was floating, and I actually started snoring standing up in water in a swamp. If that tells you just how exhausted we are. So the ranger instructor is coming by and checking on the fighting positions, and Bluer is my battle buddy. Bluer is 19 years old. He's an E3 in the Ranger Battalion. He's a young kid in the Army. He is my peer for this event. I am the 240 gunner, meaning I'm holding the gun that weighs 27 pounds. We have extra barrel, extra rounds, tripod, lots of heavy stuff. Bluer cannot keep his eyes open. So we're in this perimeter trying to keep a nice, safe area so we can plan our missions. We had a TAC mission, I believe, for that evening. We were going to do a movement to contact, and then we were going to find our enemy and assault through the objective. And the ranger instructor is coming by. Well, if you're sleeping, you can get a point deduction. You get enough point deductions, you get kicked out of school. So I'm like, Bluer, you got to get up. And I'm nudging him, I'm knocking him. And something you never thought would be really comfortable, but if you have a helmet on your head and a charging handle on your rifle, you know, the part that people pull back to put the round in the barrel, you can hook your nose on that charging handle and hook your helmet on the side of the rifle, and you can sleep really, really well in that position. So if you ever have to do that, now you know. It's a technique. So Bluer is racked out with his charging handle up his nose, and he's super happy. And I finally get him to wake up. Like, I don't want him to get kicked out. And when he does actually regain consciousness, he yells, "Mom, I'm coming!" Apparently, he thought he was still in high school, and I was waking him up for class. which would have been mildly less amusing if we didn't have the same color of red hair and his mom was 1 year younger than me. I met his mom at Ranger School graduation, and I understand why he called me mom. So sad. But that's a way, right? We really bonded over that period of time. I started learning about how these young people thought. And the weirdest thing is, as somebody at the time, 36, I turned 37 right after I turned 38, I'm sorry, right after graduation. 37 years old, sharing a foxhole with a 19-year-old. And some of the things I learned was, you know that young generation that's really lazy and always on their phones and can't think for themselves? Yeah, you know what? They're really, really smart. And you know what they know how to do? They know how to leverage the computer that they carry in their hand everywhere. You know what else they know how to do? They know how to keep in touch with people for years on end. Yes, I realize my son will never, ever call me on the phone. He doesn't know that that hand computer actually can dial a number. But as I was coming in here tonight, he sent me a Snapchat. And it was super cute, and I know exactly what he's doing tonight, and he's having a good time. And I live in Texas, it's 90 degrees there right now. He and his father are going to the pool to throw the football and jump in the pool. And I know that because he sent me a Snapchat, because he leverages those technologies. So what I learned by getting stuck with the Bluers of the world is this lazy generation that always has to be attached to their phone is amazing. We just need to figure out how to pull that out of them. Because it's easy to get on your phone and to play Candy Crush, which is so not cool anymore. I don't even know what the cool game is. Wordle is cool for old people. What's a cool game on your phone? Yeah, you. You're obviously young. Do you have a game on your phone? Give me one good game. Fortnite. Yeah, oh God, yes. Fortnite and Roblox. Well, that might be too young, yeah. But yeah, I mean, they use this phone for everything. Reading books. My son is reading his English literature book on his phone while he's in the hunting stand. I'm like, man, I would have had to bring my book bag or not go hunting with my parents over the weekend. So they're very, very different. Okay, so I already fast forward to a couple of stories, what I was doing here, Ranger School, who am I? Why the hell would a mother of two working for Royal Dutch Shell, I was a senior project manager. My life working at Royal Dutch Shell was super simple. What I did is, I need to go to my project site. Now, when I was working offshore, that meant I took a helicopter, I made sure I went down there for surf and turf night, because if you ever want to have really good surf and turf, go offshore, where they fish right there. It's super fresh. But if I had a land-based project, I would get in the King Air. So I would live in Houston, I would go to the regional airport, I would walk right onto the airfield, sit down, the pilot would come, give me a cup of coffee. I am not bragging, I am telling you that I am a spoiled brat. Absolutely spoiled. Have my cup of coffee, take my little flight down to South Texas, check on my project sites, drive around in the truck, high-five my people, yell at the guy who had the safety violation, and then go in the office, have another cup of coffee, put on my boots and act like I was tough and cool, and then I'd have to deal with all the trouble of the mistakes I made and going through the planning and the engineering. So living a really, really blessed life. Well, my sergeant major, for those of you who don't know what a sergeant major is, that's your senior enlisted advisor. That's also a really confusing term if you don't understand it. So they're the person who worked their way up from the bottom to the top. They are, well, I called my first sergeant, who's a level under my sergeant major, I called my first sergeant Gollum. You guys know Lord of the Rings? He was, yeah, thank you. He was about this tall, and he kind of looked like Gollum, like this. And then we would go out to do PT. He would smoke me. I mean, that guy was one cigarette away from turning into pure charcoal. And he could run fast, like speed of lightning, flash fast. And he would run his 2-mile PT test, come back and pick his cigarette up off his coffee, because the man hadn't drank water in probably 50 years, and finish his cigarette because it didn't go out while he was running 2 miles. Like those are those guys. Well, my senior enlisted advisor, Sergeant Major Robbie Payne, yes, let's pause a moment. His name was Sergeant Major Payne, decided he was going to egg me on. And between him and my husband, they incorporated my children into this process. So now I have my senior enlisted advisor, the guy in the Army who I trust more than anyone else in the world, my husband, the guy who I trust with my life more than anyone else in the world, but he still doesn't know it. Okay, we've been together for 20 years. Please do not tell him I spoke positively about him. It'll ruin our home dynamic. And then my beautiful children, who at the time were 3 and 6. And they're all talking to me, and they're all thinking, wow, Mom, you need to do this. You need to go to Ranger School. And I didn't. You know, I told Sergeant Major Payne, I like room service. Like, I'm not going to go live in the woods and shave my head and cut my nails. Like, that's not me. I want to be bougie. And I mean, I'm a redneck. I like to go hunting. I like to fish. I don't glamp. Like, I like camping, but I want to do it on my terms. Like, I want to wear the clothes I want to wear. I want to wear boots that actually fit my feet. I want to wear clothes that breathe, not things with cargo pockets that are made out of former parachutes or whatever the heck, you know, they make those canvas outfits out of. I didn't want to be like this. I want to be my version of rugged. And finally, my husband talked me into it, but one of the phrases he used was right up there on the screen. See, I did actually use the slides. Don't tell anyone. Okay, so a ship is always safe at the shore, but that's not what it's built for. At that point in time, my Shell email address had that quote in my signature block. And my husband was like, you know, baby, there's a lot of women out in the world who could do hard things. He's like, but Afghanistan, Iraq, being one of the first women in both of those theaters, being a combat engineer before women were allowed in combat, earning your combat action badge before women were allowed in combat, running patrols before women were allowed in combat. He goes, you got a chip on your shoulder, baby, and this is your opportunity to use it. And my husband, who knows me better than anyone else in the world, looked at me and said, Lisa, you were made for this. So I did what any good red-blooded American does in 2014. I took it to Facebook. Why not? And yes, I know for you younger people, Facebook is what the old people use. For you older people, this is what the younger people use. But Facebook is this great collection, right? And at that time, you didn't have 5,000 friends, right? You just had people who actually knew you and actually cared about you. So I put on there, and I have a screenshot of the post so I can look at it every once in a while and remind myself of my stupidity and naivety. But I wrote on there and I said, hey, this is happening. Ranger School is being open to women. And I think I'm throwing my name in the ring. You know, I put the Man in the Arena, I forget what it's actually called, but Man in the Arena by Teddy Roosevelt. I stuck that up there too. And then I wrote, if you see me walking around with a rucksack, booty shorts, and combat boots, you just say drive on Ranger and I'll know you're talking to me. And at that time I was a pretty serious CrossFitter, and to my son's chagrin, my shorts were short, my socks were high, just like they're supposed to be. And to this day, he's like, please, Mom, don't go in public like that. Which of course means I am always in public like that, because he's 16 and it's my job to make sure that he's mortified at least 2 days a week. So I put this out there and I said at the end of my Facebook post, if you don't support me, you can unfriend me. So much power in that statement, right? You know, I really hate the unfriend concept, because the unfriend concept would have taken away some of the best conversations I've had about Ranger School, not only in 2014, but also today. It would have put me in an echo chamber that led me in the wrong direction. So 2014, putting this out on there on Facebook, all of my friends, most of my friends, if anybody can do it, Lisa, you can. Drive on Ranger, Rangers lead the way. private DMs from some of my West Point classmates going, you're nuts, you're stupid, let somebody who isn't over the hill do it. You do know in the Army, after 35, if you try to go to any schools, they make you get an additional physical because they're so afraid you're going to die. I had to get EKGs. I had to get a lot of things to prove that at 37, I wasn't going to just crumble when I went in the field, which is pretty amusing because they had no problems deploying me to a combat zone in my 40s. But, so I put this Facebook post on there, and here's an interesting factoid, is sometimes you have friends that have the intestinal fortitude to tell you you're stupid publicly, but do it in such a way that you can hear them. And I had those friends. One of my husband's friends from grade school on, his name's Lonnie, and his wife's name is Babs. They're LDS, so they're Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Most people know them as Mormon, and they're very, very traditional. And on my Facebook page, they wrote, "You're being selfish. You're a mother. It is time for you to let your kids see the limelight. Your life should be focused on parenting and raising the next generation, not on being selfish." I mean, that hurts, right? I mean, listening to it now, it's like, wow. But they're not wrong. They're not wrong. I chose to have children, and I should choose to raise them. But how I raise them, in my mind, is by leading by example. So my husband got a little agitated because there is no way to make a 6'9" man mad quicker than to mess with his old lady. And so he went straight up, basement warrior, popped up his keyboard, like he looked like a bad cartoon, right? Just slamming on those keys. And he was saying all this stuff to his lifetime friends about how they should be supportive and they just don't understand. And how would your mother feel if she knew that you gave up on being an individual just because you were a parent? Like, whoa, slow your roll. And it went back and forth, and it got a little aggressive, as social media comments do. But then Babs said something that really hit home. And what Babs said to me was, hey, if you're not there for your kids, for the small things when they're little, when your kids get older, they're not going to come to you for the big things. Oof. Parents, how many parents? That's true. That's true, okay? And how does that pertain to the discussion today? It pertains because our world is changing. We say that to a mom, but would we say that to a dad? And if we wouldn't, maybe we should. I'm not going to say that she shouldn't have said that to me. I'm going to say, when my husband went to a school a year earlier, the same rule held true. So maybe the thought process needs to be, when are we sacrificing that family time? Is it okay, and is it worth it? And times are changing, and I say that because you know what my husband did while I was gone for 6 months? He got rid of a lot of the living room furniture. You know what he replaced it with? A wrestling mat. My entire family does Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So when the kids were getting feisty, and my husband, who's actually a worse cook than I am, and I'm pretty bad, when he was cooking dinner, to keep the kids focused, he would have them do wrestling drills in the living room because he could watch them from the kitchen. That's pretty awesome. You know what else happened? He signed my daughter and my son, my 3-year-old daughter, up for a wrestling tournament. Do you know how many 3-year-old girls are at wrestling tournaments? Now, I didn't show you a current picture of my daughter, but she is 12 years old and stands at 5'10.5". She likes to round up to 5'11". I'm 5'4", with pony heels. So my daughter is a gigantor. So she had to wrestle in the heavyweight tots division. So while my daughter is at this wrestling meet, there's a couple other girls there too. Well, for girls that young or kids that young, they don't wear just the earphones because they don't stay on little kids' heads. You know the ones I'm talking about, right? So that they don't get cauliflower ear, even though all the boys are trying to get cauliflower ear so they look tough when they grow up. Yeah. They have like this whole headgear piece. Well, there's one spot right here that if you do the ponytail just right, it'll stay up and stay out of the face. Well, my husband is so talented at the high wrestling ponytail that he went to this wrestling tournament and he had a little row of girls sitting in front of him and he was just sitting there, you know, this is fatherhood, right? My kids to this day have a relationship with their dad that most kids don't get to have. Why? Because at one point in time we said, you know what? He's not babysitting them. He's parenting them. And if he needs to go and do stuff, then I got this, baby. These are my kids. I will take care of them. But in return, my husband looked at me and said, when I got in the taxi cab to leave for Ranger School, my husband looked me in the eyes and said, leave mom at home. Leave Lisa at home. Major Jaster is going to Ranger School. Major Jaster will graduate, and mom will be here when you get back. And every single time I called home over this 6 months, every time, the first thing he did when he picked up the phone was, baby, we got this. The home is secure. How fantastic. Do you have a group? Do you have a team Jaster? Do you have your own, whether it's the chaplain butt stroking me or my husband saying, we got this, babe? Do you have that? And if you don't, look around this room. Look at the people who are willing to come to these events. Look at the people who are veterans just like you, who have shared experiences. Grab their hand before the end of the night and say, let me get your number so we can grab coffee next week. Hey, in February, when the weather kind of sucks here, the world kind of sucks, everything's a little dark and gloomy, let's go get coffee when everybody else is sad because the Christmas decorations are down and everything else is kind of falling apart. How we deal with change, how we grow the veteran community, we know how to do that. One of my favorite things to do, now I come from San Antonio, and San Antonio is ridiculous. It's a military city. We've got Randall Air Force Base, 18,000 Army bases. We even have some Marines that run around every once in a while, but we ignore them. And you know, it's a military community. But I love when I travel somewhere else and you see someone, my mechanic. I went to get my car fixed in a small town. Just, hey, I need an oil change real quick. How long will it take? The guy working on my car is wearing military issue. I think he actually had like old school black boots. And I was like, dude, when did you serve? Didn't ask him his name. Didn't ask him how much the oil change was going to cost. Gave him my car keys and said, when did you serve, brother? And he starts telling me. And he starts telling me about how he went to Bosnia and all of, next thing you know, he's like, it's $10. I'm like, I know it's not $10, brother. Like, you got to make a living. Let's work with this. And but that bond was there. We had nothing else in common other than the fact that he was wearing old school black boots and I recognized him. To the military members of this community, please understand this nation is in a crazy time. We don't have to reference anything specific for us to know that there's something crazy going on. And there's a lot of feelings. What do we do as veterans other than hide our feelings? We find each other. We reach out to people. We deal with change really well. There's a lot of Americans that right now, the best thing that veterans can do on this Veterans Day and every day after is to reach out and show them how well we deal with change, how well we deal with chaos. What is it? I'm going to say it wrong. It's E. What's the motto? Somebody give it to me. E something. There we go. And what does it mean? Yes, out of many one. Let's work together. Let's heal the parts of this country that are finding a divide. And I say finding a divide because when I go back home, I look at my small community in Bulverde, Texas, and there's no divide there. You find somebody who voted different from you, you make fun of them, and then you have a glass of wine, cup of coffee, and you get on with your day and talk about Ranger football. Because yes, we moved to a town where the mascot is the Rangers. That wasn't my choice, I swear. But yes, our cat is named Ranger, our high school is the Rangers, and yes, I'm Mama Ranger. So it all is just like serendipitous. But in my town, in my community, in this small bubble, that's where we live. We don't live in the DC world. So what I'm asking you to do is to move forward and remember that motto. I'm gonna go into a Q&A session in just a couple minutes. But I want to tell you 2 short stories first, but I'm warning you that I'm going to do Q&A because if you don't ask questions, I'll feel stupid and it will break my heart. So start thinking about these questions, even if you're ignoring my story, okay? So one thing happened at Ranger School that was really, really hard for me, and it was the fact that, remember I said anybody you really, really love or hate in the military kind of has a nickname? Well, there happened to be this guy, he was about 6'4", former lacrosse player. We'll just say we called him Thor. He was kind of a lump. They say that you have strong rangers and you have smart rangers. He was a really strong ranger. Yeah, he was my battle buddy, and I absolutely loved working with him because the things I was good at, I was a really smart ranger that I like to think I was fairly strong, but you know, at 140 pounds, I can't compete with these 250-pound guys that are standing next to me. I carried my weight. I always carried something extra because I had a chip on my shoulder, but if I had to do it again, that wasn't always the best decision because I almost broke myself off because of it, trying so hard to prove myself. Anyone who's ever climbed a hill, faced a challenge, you understand what that process looks like. But Thor and I were battle buddies. We are sitting in the perimeter, both laying in the prone, and it starts raining. And anybody been to Fort Benning, now Fort Moore, Georgia? Okay, yeah, I mean, there's something wrong with the clay. Like the earth is made from this awful red clay that becomes almost like one of those creatures from a horror movie. Like it'll slick itself on you and it'll never, ever, ever come off again. And so once it starts raining and I start slipping and sliding, again, uniformed wear, being in the Army, not my forte. So walking through the woods, I was all over the place. Thor was making fun of me. He said, I love walking behind you because I know exactly where not to step. Like every time your foot falls, you're about to fall. So to make a short story long, we find our perimeter, we sit in our position, and the temperature starts dropping. And the Army, in its forever wisdom, is not okay with you wearing your snivel gear. Like it could be cold and raining, but God forbid you take the rain gear out of your backpack and put it on your human. That would show weakness. Now, God forbid, you cannot wear wet weather gear while it's raining. That's absolutely silly. So Thor and I are sitting together, and I start looking around the perimeter. All the other buddy teams are 2 guys, and they are all, and I'm looking at Marine, right? Yeah, I know you know where I'm going with this, right? So the 2 guys in every other foxhole are sharing a fart sack. For those of you who don't know, the translation for a fart sack is a sleeping bag. You can imagine where it got its name from. So you have 2 guys per sleeping bag. And I look at Thor and I'm like, dude, I am going to die of hypothermia. I'm the skinniest person here. I'm the smallest person here. And he's like, you are a girl. And he says it really loud, like he was informing me of this fact. He's like, you are a girl. And that's not okay. And I was like, okay, so I'm gonna freeze to death because you would rather snuggle with a man. And he was like, yes. And I mean, and that's where I was at Ranger School. Now, fast forward almost 6 months, and we're at the end of Ranger School in Swamps, and there was this guy, absolutely fantastic, another ginger, actually, and he's standing in the woods, and he starts yelling my name, and he has to tell me a story. So I run over there, and just to realize that he is completely changing his clothes. And I'm thinking, okay, I'm about to get kicked out of Ranger School because I'm looking at God and country. How do I deal with this? You know, because you're not supposed to be talking, you're not supposed to be yelling to each other. So, and now I'm right here, and I can't go off by myself, and I'm just, okay. So he's yammering. He's absolutely yammering at me. Like he's going 100 miles an hour, and he's got everything showing, and I'm just, Okay, okay, awesome. And as soon as he like tries to take a breath, I'm like, dude, you're naked. And he was like, uh-huh. And he just keeps talking. And finally, I'm so freaked out. I think I'm gonna get kicked out of Ranger School after being here for almost 6 months because I'm around a guy who's not appropriately dressed. So I turn around and walk away briskly. And I hear, oh, damn, Jaster, I forgot you were a chick. As I walked away, the smallest tear trickled down my cheek. Because I went from, hey, I don't care if you're dying of hypothermia, I'm not touching a girl, to, man, I just wanted to tell you a really cool story. I forgot you were a woman. And I felt like somehow that was the pinnacle. I had made it. I had broke through the mystical bro bond, and I was accepted at Ranger School. So with that, I want to take a dramatic pause and see if there are any questions in the audience tonight. And I know we have microphones somewhere, so there we go. Make them hard ones. We've got one up here, right. Chris.
Why do 25% of the people fail before you started? What the hell happened there?
Yeah, so there's a physical fitness test the first morning, and you know what it's like. It is 49 push-ups, 69 sit-ups, 5-mile run under 40 minutes, and 6 dead hang chin-ups. This way, not this way. And you have to put your head all the way over the top, which I did very sarcastically when I did my chin-ups, by the way. But what happened is a good chunk of the population, everyone had been able to pass that PT test when they showed up the day before. But without eating, without sleeping, and with the mental and physical stress, quite a few people just didn't pass. And so the 25% attrition rate was just from that PT test. Now, in Ranger School lore, you will hear that they purposely fail at least 25% because they don't have enough beds in the barracks. I don't know about that because, you know, if you were going to fail somebody, the old lady would have been somebody I would have tried to fail right away. But if you make sure that your dog tags jingle in the sand and your elbows lock up, it's pretty hard not to count your push-ups. So that's the longest version of that answer I can give you. There's a question up here on my left, your right, Chris, green sweatshirt.
You shed a tear when you were recognized as a ranger rather than as a woman. Okay. You shed a tear when you were recognized as a ranger and not as a woman, which is a good thing. How long before that becomes normal and not just with the elite corps?
Wow. I don't know, but I will tell you this. So my son, I love having teenage kids, by the way, because they challenge everything you say as a parent. Some days, but other days it helps you develop your discussion points, right? And so my son asked me, he's like, well, your book is called Delete the Adjective. The whole point, what I talk about all the time is I don't want to be known as a middle-aged woman who graduated Ranger School. I just want to be known as a Ranger School graduate, getting to your point. But the truth is I also don't want to lose my adjectives. So I want adjectives to describe us, not define us. So I don't think there's such a thing as a colorblind world, and I definitely don't think there's such a thing as a genderblind world. And I think there's something to respecting the differences that make us an amazing community, but understanding that merit first has to be the priority, and especially in mission-driven positions, whether it's the military, law enforcement, a doctor. Like, I don't care about any adjective for a doctor other than you're the smartest person in this hospital. If you're going to cut me open, you better be a phenom at medicine. So will we ever get there to the point where adjectives don't matter? 100%, I don't think it will. But I do believe we're getting to the point where, as a society, we understand the importance of meritocracy. And I say that to say something that in an academic environment might be great for debate. And and this is actually what I do in my corporate coaching, is I talk about diversity and inclusion. Now I talk about inclusion and diversity, because a lot of times when people are talking about diversity, they leave out our white males. Apparently white males are not diverse. They're the vanilla that starts the baking process instead of being an actual part of the cornucopia. So that was a lot of different references thrown in together. So just hopefully you stuck with me. But when I talk about diversity and I talk about being a woman versus being a female ranger versus just being a ranger school graduate, one of the things I like to point out is what I brought to ranger school had more, when I added value, every time I added value, it was because I had combat deployments, not because I was a woman, because I had kids. That actually helped. Like the other parents, the dads, had some creative solutions because they had dealt with kid BS in the past. Or it was, because I had been a hunter. Like all my other adjectives mattered a ton. So you have experiential diversity, like my experiences aren't the same as your experiences. We have visual diversity, or those adjectives, right? You and I look slightly different. And then we have cognitive diversity. We might both be white females about the same age, but we might think differently, or we might think the same. So there's multiple ways of having diversity, and I think what I loved about that last story is that what I brought to Ranger School at that time, they loved me because what I brought here and what I brought here, and not what any of this brought to the table. So to answer your question, I didn't answer your question, but I think we're getting there. And I think even corporate America is starting to shift our inclusion and diversity focus to the point where we're starting to look at cognitive diversity more than those demographic diversities. You look different than me. What other questions? Yes, ma'am. We are running Chris. I love it.
So I'm an Army veteran. I should probably know this, but what's the difference between a Ranger and a Green Beret and Special Forces?
Yeah. So Rangers are, you kind of have, in combat arms, you have your infantrymen. Infantrymen who have a little bit more training go to Ranger School. And then going to Ranger School doesn't make you a Ranger, which I am constantly told. I'm not a Ranger, I'm a Ranger School graduate. Gotta love those communities that want to keep me out. I'm fine with it. My heart breaks a little bit, but I'm all right. I'll cry in my pillow later tonight. Then you have the people who go to Ranger Battalion. So those are all Rangers and gals now. And they have a higher level of training and a slightly different mission. But then when you start getting into the special ops communities, and some people include Rangers in special operations, some people do not. But your Green Berets, and then you start going the Deltas and some of the others, those live in the SOF world, Special Operations Forces, and their mission matriculates a little bit past the whole, we're no longer combat focused, we're hearts and minds, but we have a really high level of being a combatant. So those are the guys that are trying to win the hearts and minds, get in the communities, help the communities, really grow the relationship. They're, when you have military actions, you have DIME. God, I'm going to get too much into a lesson, but the truth is, once you get into those hearts and minds, they have a different focus and a different personality, like your CAG guys too, your civil affairs. So, yes, sir. Chris, you again. Hey, you're.
Hi. So of all the conflicts that exist in the world right now and
Yes.
the potential conflicts, what has you as, a service person most concerned, and why?
So I will say that Russia no longer appears to be as big of a threat as we used to believe, right? Their actions against Ukraine have demonstrated a lot of their weaknesses. So I believe the biggest threat is China. I also believe we like to talk about that combat arms and the combatant force-on-force fighting, but as I was mentioning with our younger generation, one of the reasons we need to recruit them more is that AI, the cyberspace, the virtual battlefield is the most dangerous area, and China, as we all know, has been very technologically advanced for a very long time. So there's some great books about it. There's some great fiction books about it that I like. I think it's 2034. Has anyone read that one? But yeah, so that's where I would feel our biggest threat is in the cyber space and with China. What other questions do we have? All right, you're next, then you. Okay, that's okay.
Hello. So I was wondering, I'm not sure if you still stay in touch with the other women who are going through Ranger School or not, but do they still have to deal with all the BS you had to, or are they able to do it in the same way as the guys?
Good question. So one of our biggest problems is they made the women maintain a 1/4 inch of hair while the men all shaved their heads, which made us stick out. If you ever think that somebody's picking on you, look around the room and see if eyes naturally flow to you. If you look different than the people around you, you're the only person wearing glasses, you're the only person with a shaved head, you're the only person without a shaved head, the eye naturally floats to that thing that looks a little bit different. So by not allowing us to shave our heads, it actually brought more ire and more attention towards us. So that was bad. So we petitioned, and the Army did change the rule. Only for that school, women are allowed to shave their heads. Do they still deal with it? Somewhat, but the good thing is there's been enough women, not a lot, but there's been enough women who have gone through that have been like, all right, she's pretty badass. Like, she's walking right next to me. She hasn't fallen down. She hasn't fallen back. She's not crying. She's not going to take showers while I'm working hard. So there's been enough exposure that most of the guys, even if they don't like it, the resistance is that the overt resistance is not there anymore. Not that the hidden resistance isn't. I don't know if that'll ever be true. I mean, we've got people in a lot of underrepresented demographics that can list off probably semi-permanent pushback. So you had a question over here.
What role does your physical fitness play in your success, or how much do you attribute that to your success in Ranger School and then just in your daily life?
Yeah, with Ranger School, it was huge because a lot of women tried to go to Ranger School, but they weren't already at a high level of fitness. I was competing in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and CrossFit. Actually, the day I showed up to Ranger School, I was supposed to be doing an Olympic lifting competition. So I was already pretty muscularly dense. At 47, I continued to work out almost every day. I continued to do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu as well. And where that is helpful for me is I feel like in life, it is really hard to function on a high plane mentally when your body isn't functioning normally physically. So I have an addiction and I'm a little extreme. And I recognize that. I am not normal, but anyone who's gone through a health challenge can tell you when you're worried about your health, it's very complicated to, or it's very hard to continue a high level of mental thought processes. So, and the other thing for me is if I'm going to continue to talk in front of people, I think it's important that I can still do 49 Ranger push-ups, 69 Ranger sit-ups, run my 5 mile. Because a lot of times when I do go to colleges, I'll go and I'll work out with their ROTC, and I want to look at the younger guys and be like, hey, I'll go for a run with you. Let's do push-ups, let's do pull-ups. And it helps me to connect with the future of America, which is our younger generation. I know we had a question here, and so this lady here and gentleman in the green shirt.
I just wanted to ask, what was it that brought you into the military? I don't think or at least heard that in your presentation. And secondly, I just wanted to say thank you for your service.
Well, to the second part, you're worth it. To the first part, what made me join the military is actually the first Gulf War. I was young and influential, easily influenced actually, watching it on TV and seeing what the Americans were willing to do in response to what was going on in Iraq and Kuwait back in the early 90s. I would watch those guys on TV and go, well, you've got these people who pretend to be soldiers. You have these actors and actresses that a lot of us look up to. Well, they pretend for a living. I don't want to play the video game. I want to be the character in the video game that other people play. And at a very young age, that was my thought process. Yeah, that drove me to the military. I grew up in a small Midwest town. Everybody had a flag outside their house for as long as I can remember. And my dad served, my grandfather served. My brother ended up joining law enforcement. You know, my uncle served. I had an Uncle Bob and an Uncle Al, both were in the Army. So I was in a world where this is what you do, for sure. Black shirt.
Thanks. Thank you. I'm thinking about that we're having a president outgoing in his 80s and a president incoming who will turn 80 in office. And thinking about your comments about including even your experience of feeling old, but really being young, right, by general terms. And wondering if there's space, and you would think there's value in engaging older Americans, maybe who aren't going to do the physical work, but the mental and the cognitive work for retraining, retooling, and being able to have a second career that would be military. Is the military prepared to engage that, or are they engaging it?
Interesting. Yeah, so the military, when you have your older, more experienced, we do bring them in the DAC world, DA civilian, Department of the Army civilians. I work with a lot of DOD civilians. I had a gentleman actually who went to Ranger School with my father in 1968 that works with me in my military job who just retired this year. So they do leverage them in that way, but because of the physical aspects when you go overseas, putting someone in uniform would be a negative. But along those same lines, like I absolutely love that question or that comment as well, because I want to tell a story about Afghanistan. An interesting thing to me is one of my close friends is a Green Beret, and he's a National Guardsman, and he went over to Afghanistan, and a lot of the babies were starving. And so he, as a new dad, now he has some questionable morals in his early life. He was a new dad, 2 baby girls, 2 different baby mamas, but he had 2 baby girls and was overseas and was feeling this pang of dread as he watched these little kids starving. So he petitioned some of us back in the States and collected baby food jars. And he had them sent over to Afghanistan, and he was giving them to mothers. And as they were walking through one of the villages, they went through where the village elders were meeting, and all the village elders, which were old men, had eaten all the baby food. And he lost his ever-living mind. You know, again, as a new dad, 2 baby girls, you're gonna let babies starve. And finally, through an interpreter, he found out why. The mothers were giving the baby food to the older men because the older men were starting to get sickly. And in that culture where food, or in that environment where food was very sparse, and especially food that older people who, you know, your teeth start going, chewing whatever lamb chops that they were making, like, became more difficult. The women of the town communicated that if we let our older tribal elders die, we're losing the knowledge of our village, and we're losing a great asset. And in a what we as Americans would consider very heartless, they said, we'll have more babies. We will continue to reproduce, our families will grow, but we cannot reproduce this knowledge. And so, is that right or wrong? I don't know, but I do take a nugget from that and say, hey, look at this culture that truly values their older generation and the value that they bring, and what can we take as a learning from that lesson? Do I want to be in that stage where I'm deciding who gets to live or die? Heck no. But I do understand it. So interesting statement, and also a very interesting observation. I do think there's a lot of knowledge out there that we don't leverage. And I do believe there's a lot of people out there that once they complete their corporate life, they begin to let themselves expire. And so when I retire, I said it this morning as well, I want somebody to buy me a hat that says retired but not expired, because I want to still be used. I still want to be added value to my community, for sure. I'm not sure how we're doing on time, but we definitely have more questions, so I'm good if, yes, sir.
You mentioned that you came from a small Midwestern town, and it's my impression that the military is filled with people who come from smaller towns and less with people who come from urban areas. Is that your experience? And what, if that's the case, what could the military do to be more effective in recruiting people from urban areas and allow for the connection and the unification that would happen with those folks mixing through the military?
Yeah, I think those of us that are rednecks, like, we definitely find ourselves, we're like, you're gonna pay me to shoot. Sure. You're gonna pay me to jump out of airplanes. You're gonna pay me to walk out of the woods. Great. I think early exposure and also understanding the breadth of the military is what we need to do for our urban environments. And I know our recruiters are working on it, but there's a lot of schools that won't even let our recruiters inside cities. So we need to figure out a way to access those youths in a safe environment, whether it's at the youth clubs. We had a little dance hall that we were allowed to go to after school, the YMCAs. And this is actually something I'm working on with the military, with the recruiting command, is how do we get to those kids when we're not even allowed in the schools? But I do believe high school is way too late. You know, helping kids understand that we're recruiting gamers right now, because a drone operator who is like me and walks through the woods really well is useless. I need a kid who knows how to make something 500 miles away operate like he's flying it with his own personal hand. And I can't do that, and I will never be able to do it. So we're actually trying to recruit those kids who aren't necessarily have access to the outdoors. It's just really hard to get through the gates. So I believe, again, that's something that our veteran communities, a lot of us start maybe in these small rural towns, but eventually when we want to make our hay, when we're trying to make our big bucks, I'm a civil structural engineer, lived in Houston, I made a point to pick my kids up from school in uniform every once in a while and have kids ask me, ooh, what is this? What is this? Oh, this says I jump out of helicopters. How cool is that? And just try to spark their interest. But I think us as veterans are going to have to do that because the schools are locking the recruiters out. So over here, and then we'll come back.
This afternoon at the luncheon, you mentioned the gentleman who was in charge of your Ranger schooling. You had done everything you were supposed to do. You, all of the other students in the Ranger school gave you the okay as to wanting to be, you know, you would be in a foxhole in wartime, and they would want you there. Yeah. What was his motivation? Was it because you were a female? Was it because that you had the advantage of having been at West Point? What do you think his motivation was? I thought about that all afternoon, and I thought, what a creep. But, you know, there was no reason for that in my estimation.
Yeah. And you're talking about why did he give me a second chance or restart me? So I know not everybody was at the luncheon today. The short version of the story is I was about to get kicked out of Ranger School. Like I was at that point, all 8 women had been told, hey, listen, you guys can't cut it. We were all getting kicked out. There were 3 of us that were told we could start over. Believe it or not, and this is the part that didn't come out in the news when they said women got this opportunity to restart. Has anybody heard that? Women got more chances than the men? Guess what? The men, there were several men that were actually offered to restart as well, and they all said no. All 3 of us women who were offered the opportunity to restart day 0 and start the entire thing from that first PT test to the road march, all 3 of us said yes because we didn't know if we'd ever have an opportunity to come back. But all of the men were like, you know what? I'm going to go home, get fat and happy again. I don't want to stay here, and I'll try again at a later date. So all the men, there were men that were offered the same opportunity. They just turned it down. So does that answer your question? All right. Ma'am?
This is going to be our final question.
I'm happy that the issue of recruitment has come up. And I was thinking about Israel, which has mandatory service for men and women, and then miluim, which means continuing service until age 50 at least, meaning you're in reserve and you could be called up at any time. And I'm thinking about how maybe America could be strengthened by having mandatory active service, and what you think about that related to this issue of, quote, getting into the high schools.
Yeah. I struggle with mandatory service because I don't believe everyone is suited to serve. I believe it takes a special desire to want to serve something higher, just like not everybody could ever understand religion or faith. There's almost a religious feel to the level of patriotism required to get off that airplane in Afghanistan under live fire. And I pray that no one has to deal with that ever again, but I will tell you that was a no shit moment for me in life when I'm like, okay, I am 24 years old and I'm going to get off this airplane, and if somebody shoots at me, I could never move again, or I could have to kill them. And I don't think everyone should have to deal with that, so mandatory service is not, because I've been across the pond, I feel like I don't want to force anyone else into that situation because not everybody's mentally capable of dealing with that type of stress. That being said, I believe everyone as a parent, and feel free to disagree with me, but I do feel that as a parent, it's important that everyone serves a higher purpose at some point in their life. And I think that would help the nation be stronger, because I think a lot of our issues are at the home front. People like to complain, they like to shout, they like to argue. Are they getting involved? So are they part of Big Brothers, Big Sisters? Are they volunteering at the soup kitchen? Are they helping? Are they physically? I don't want your money necessarily. I mean, if that's what you can give, great. But I used to, when I lived in Houston, I would walk under the bridge and go grab lunch with some of my workmates. Well, all the rolls that were on the table, they were going to get thrown away when I left. So I took them in a plastic bag and just gave them to the homeless guy who lived under the bridge that I walked under every single day. Did that help him? I don't know. But it was the thought process of, he's part of my community, he's in my world. So in my humble opinion, I wouldn't do mandatory service, but as a parent, my children will serve a higher purpose. They do now. My 16-year-old is old enough to start donating blood. He's doing that on non-football weekends. I would not mess with Texas football by making my son donate on a football week, but on non-football weekends, my son does take the opportunity to donate blood. My daughter does actually teach at a wilderness camp at 12 years old. She teaches other little girls how to shoot a bow, because she is also a redneck. So before I'm raising her right. Now, she does have a pink bow. So she does live in the and. Before Brent hooks me off stage, I want to tell you one more story. When I talk about change, remember we started this journey with 2014. I wasn't interested, and neither was anyone around me. And a lot of my friends didn't believe that women belonged in combat arms. I even argued while I was at Ranger School, women don't belong in combat arms, but they belong in school. That's another discussion. We could go another 30 minutes on that one. But fast forward to me graduating from Ranger School. It is my 38th birthday, October 28th, 2015, and I am walking my daughter home from school. Her daycare was 0.93 miles away from my house, so she was either a weight in my rucksack, I would actually hike her, or we would jog together, we would hike together, I would sit her on my shoulders. She was part of my training. That's how I tried to pretend that I was actually being a good mother by doing this, this selfish task that I referred to earlier. And as we're coming home and I'm bringing her to the house, she stops, and we lived inside the Beltway in Houston, so not a good place to stop, but her and I were jogging. And it was cold. I had my head shaved, and it's October, which October in Houston doesn't sound like a big deal to you guys, but anything below like 70 degrees to me, and I've got sweatshirts on. So my beautiful little 3-year-old snatched my hat off my head, and it's a black hat with that little Army crest right here. I know you guys have seen it. Like every veteran you know owns at least 5 of these. She snatches it off her head, and she pulls it down over her eyes where her little doe eyes are just peeking out of the bottom. And I did what they tell parents to do, hey, if your kids want to talk to you, get to eye level. And I'm like, hey, baby, what's up? What's wrong? And I squatted down, so I'm eye level with my 3-year-old, and I'm, what's going on? She goes, hey, Mom, I got to ask you a question. Actually, she calls me Mama. Even now, she calls me Mama. It's kind of cute because she's almost 6 foot. Hey, Mama. And she says, hey, Mama, can boys go to Ranger School too? And the world was changed in 6 months.